This is to continue with the topic of acute coronary care. In the last class, we basically dealt with the theory. We dealt with the pathophysiology, the different types of ACS, how you diagnose it, what is the role of troponin and other cardiac biomarkers, what are the typical ECG changes that you see. And we also spoke about treatment, both your general treatment, that is your airway breathing circulation, and also your specific treatments. We spoke about antiplatelets, anticoagulation, your oxygen supplementation strategy, reperfusion strategy, and also how to recognize and treat complications associated with ACS. I'm hoping you've attended or at least seen the video of the previous class. So just before I go into the MCQs, I'll just try to quickly brush over the crucial points of what we dealt with in the previous class. This class is just primarily going to be MCQs. Okay, so we'll just try to cover as many MCQs as we can. I have a bunch of them ready, which is basically around ACS and related topics, which should be enough for your EDIC 1 preparation. So to quickly revise what we went through in the other class, ACS is obviously a time-critical diagnosis. We spoke about the importance of a 12-lead ECG and why it's important to repeat it if the symptoms continue to persist, because the initial ECG might be normal. We spoke about troponin and its importance, how it is more important with NSTEMI, and while in STEMI, your ECG and clinical symptoms are good enough to go ahead with the treatment. We spoke about classical ST elevation, what are the different parameters, how it varies according to age and sex. And we spoke about certain high-risk patterns, such as how you pick up a posterior MI or an RV infarction, new LBB, and other ischemic changes. We spoke about highly sensitive troponin, we spoke about the importance of troponin, other biomarkers, and also the fallacies of troponin. We spoke about ABCDEs when it came to ACS, ECG monitoring, need for defibrillator, antiplatelets, anticoagulation, analgesia. Primary PCI is obviously your go-to for STEMI, and fibrinolysis was also talked about in detail. We spoke about high risk, very high risk NSTEMI and high risk NSTEMI, how you differentiate between the two, and how your management strategy also differs according to that. Spoke about the antiplatelet strategy, how we routinely give aspirin and P2Y12 inhibitors, what are the contraindications, what are the scenarios in which you might alter your antiplatelet strategy. We spoke about clopidogrel and its usefulness with fibrinolysis, oral anticoagulation. Spoke about different types of anticoagulation, the advantages of UFH versus low molecular weight heparin. We spoke about cardiogenic shock, the different stages of cardiogenic shock, the SCAI classification, the importance of revascularization in cardiogenic shock, and also mechanical complications. What are the important mechanical complications, how you pick them up, what are the different clinical features, and also how you treat them. So, coming straight to the MCQs, most of these I'm sure you guys will be able to answer. Your EDIC would not ask you very complicated stuff when it comes to ACS, because ACS for intensivists is quite straightforward. Okay, there's not much nuance or not much guideline change when it comes to the different treatment strategies. Okay, so these are all full toss questions. So I have around 30 MCQs here, which covers the different aspects. Please try to answer them as early as you can. I'll try to ask you follow-up questions. And I think if we cover this 30 questions, that's more than enough for this class and for this domain. Okay, so here you have a 58-year-old man. This person presents 50 minutes after sudden onset of severe central chest pain. The ECG showing 3 millimeters ST elevation and leads to 3 and AVF with obvious reciprocal depression in 1 and AVL. Patient is hypotensive, but the lung fields are clear and the JVP is raised. Which immediate additional ECG assessment is most important before you give nitrates to this patient? What are you suspecting here, and why is it important to know this before giving a particular therapy? And how would you confirm it? That is basically what we are asking.
This is inferior wall MI.
Yes, and how would you, what is the additional test that you do here?
Will give hydration, will avoid nitrates in this inferior wall ST elevation MI.
Sure. But how do you confirm, what additional ECG assessment would you do in this patient? Do you want to rule out a right ventricular MI also in this case?
Yes, because the inferior wall RCA territory can cause right-sided MI also. So
Exactly,
we'll rule
exactly.
out
So
right-sided.
right-sided leads, right? So that's also very important. Obviously, like you said, this is a classic inferior wall MI, and like you said, it's important to know this because your treatment strategy would change drastically. In inferior wall MI, you would obviously be more judicious with hydration, right? Your raised JVP and clear lungs are typical fixtures, but you would also like to rule out an RVMI. So you definitely do right-sided leads, especially the V4R, which helps to confirm RV involvement. In RV infarction, cardiac output can be preload dependent, right? So if you have a typical pure inferior wall MI versus an inferior wall versus with an RV infarction, that patient, the second patient might be more preload dependent, right? So in those patients, you'll definitely not give them nitrates. You'll not give them nitrates, and you'll be very cautious with diuretics. You will lean more on the side of giving them a judicious fluid. So that's why it's so important to recognize.
Okay.
And so that's why posterior leads are useful when posterior MI is suspected. Typically, if you see an ST depression in V1 and V3, it's always important to confirm it with the reciprocal changes in your posterior leads. Okay. So
So
another
can we give,
simple one. Yeah,
sorry,
sure.
so in which type of inferior wall MI we can give nitrates? Without RV involvement, can we give?
Without RV involvement, also you have to be very careful. Basically, now if you have certain, like for instance, if your patient has a borderline BP, or your patient is having a first degree or a second or higher degree AV block, in those cases you would definitely be more cautious. In a pure inferior wall MI where there is no RV involvement, you can give nitrates, but in these cases, obviously, you have to be very sure. So you have to do a more detailed assessment, do a focus. If you can do an invasive hemodynamic monitoring, basically make sure that this patient is not vasodilated. In those cases, you can give them nitrates. But if the RV is involved, then strictly no.
Okay, sure.
So you have a 64-year-old woman with crushing chest pain who has an ECG showing ST depression in V1 to V3 with tall R waves and upright T waves. There is no ST elevation on the standard 12 lead ECG. Probably get many of these cases, right? So they've just come to your ICU or they've just come to your emergency. You're seeing very non-specific changes in the ECG, but you're also seeing an ST depression in V1 and V3. So what would you do here?
Posterior wall MI, option 3.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. Very good. So, like you said, obviously, yeah, ST depression here would definitely point towards the posterior wall MI. So, you confirm that with checking your posterior leads V7 and V9, and you manage it as a STEMI equivalent if you have posterior ST elevation present, right? So, isolated posterior MI often appears in the standard ECG as reciprocal anterior ST depression in V1 and V2 with tall R waves. If you find this pattern, immediately do a posterior leads and see if there's any ST elevation in the posterior leads. If there is, this is a STEMI. Okay, so posterior leads can reveal diagnostic ST elevation. In EDIC, it's important that if they give you this kind of a picture where they give you ST depression V1, V2, V1, V3, always remember that this could be equivalent to a STEMI if you have ST elevation. So they might not give you the posterior leads initially, and they might ask you what you do next. But in this case, you definitely have to check the posterior leads, rule out a STEMI, because if you have a posterior wall STEMI, you definitely have to go in for reperfusion therapy. Okay, so this might be tested, exam. Okay, so another sort of practical question, again something which might be tested because this is very guideline based. So you have a person who has suspected STEMI, they have a an oxygen saturation of 96% on room air. Patient is quite comfortable, respiratory rate of 18 to 19, no heart failure, volume overload. Which oxygen strategy is most appropriate? Which oxygen strategy would you use for this patient?
Option 2.
Option 2, very good. What happens if you give oxygen to patients with ACS who are normoxemic? What harm would you do in them?
Reperfusion injury.
Specifically for ACS, right? I know
Reperfusion injury.
perfusion injury is one thing. Obviously, the associated problems of oxygen, so increased coronary vasoconstriction, free radicals, all of that definitely, atelectasis. But in ACS, are you aware of any studies which have looked at something specific which is happening to MI patients when you give them oxygen? Any idea? It's like might not be asked in your exam, but so actually there was a study done which randomized patients into two groups. In one, both normoxic ACSs. In one group, they were given oxygen. It was found actually that their infarcts, which were seen on MRI after a few months, infarct size increased when you gave them oxygen, when they didn't need it. Why did this happen? The hypothesis was that actually oxygen increases coronary vasoconstriction. So it further reduces the blood supply to the coronaries. So that's why in ACS, only if you have hypoxemia, so your European society typically talks of a saturation less than 92%. Some textbooks say less than 90%. Or if you have a respiratory distress or heart failure. These are the only indications in which you give them oxygen. Otherwise, you are going to do more harm than good if you give them oxygen, right? So these are the definite indications for giving oxygen in ACS. And over treatment obviously has not shown any benefit. In fact, it causes harm.